So I did at one point have a PowerPoint presentation, but what happened is that it sucked. So I thought we'd just try this the old-fashioned way and see how that works. So, so what I'm going to talk about today is the Heritage Project, and it's something you probably haven't heard of because it hasn't yet been announced officially. But Canadiana and the Library and Archives Canada have been working on it together since earlier this spring. And I'll explain a little bit about Canadiana, who we are. We're a secretive so we're a non-profit registered charity. And for the last 35 years, we've worked with libraries and other memory institutions to improve access to Canada's documentary heritage. We're a membership-based organization. We're governed by essentially academic and public libraries, as well as Library and Archives Canada and the Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec. The reason that we exist is essentially to provide sort of a centralized, arm's-length, neutral body that our stakeholders can use to collaborate on projects of common interest, such as Early Canadiana Online, which is a collection of about 4.5 million pages of digitized historical documents, primarily government publications and early periodicals, and the Canadiana Discovery Portal, which is a national metadata index that contains about 1 million digital objects from about 40 different repositories across the country. We're not publicly funded. Currently, our funding comes about 75% from subscriptions to Early Canadiana Online, and then the remainder is split about evenly between membership fees and services that we provide to third parties, things like such as digitization, content hosting, custom portal development, and things of that sort. Now, Heritage it's a project to digitize about 60 million pages of archival documents that are currently being held by LACN to make them searchable, accessible, and freely available online to everybody in perpetuity. And this 60 million pages comprises about 800 major collections with material spanning about 300 years. It's LAC's most popular microfilm collection, and it's currently sitting on about 40,000 reels of film. They break down into about 5 major categories, including some genealogy, First Nations material, government documents, military records, and the papers of prominent Canadians, as well as some miscellany. So in doing this, there are a number of challenges. There's technical challenges. It's all in microfilm, and most of it is handwritten, which makes it actually kind of hard to read. Some of the stuff was actually filmed as far back as 1950. But being handwritten, it's hard to read to begin with, and it also means that running OCR is not going to pull out very much information, so there's essentially no getting full text for free on this one. There are millions of individual documents, and they're all just strung together one after another on reels of film with no even clear demarcation as to where one begins and the next one ends. And there's very little descriptive metadata. There's information really at this broad collection and font level, but nothing down to individual documents. So in addition to digitizing all this stuff, we're going to need to describe or transcribe each page, as well as identifying the boundaries of the documents within each reel of film, so we can tell where one begins and one ends. We also have to develop standards and tools that are going to allow for searching and data mining of the collection, and taking into account the various kinds of documents and the kinds of structured data that we can find. So, for example, when we're talking about things like letters and papers, doing a full text transcription would be a pretty good way to capture metadata. But there are other things where we have really structured metadata, links, tables of things that link people's names to places, to dates, and so on, and simply just writing them all down and dumping them into a full text index. I mean, you can do it, but it doesn't really maximize the utility of it, so it would be nice to be able to actually store those as normalized structured data and to link them to one another. And there are a lot of things that are essentially form letters, things like land transfers, where it's page after page after page of boilerplate where the interesting information is the handwritten fill-in-the-blank stuff. It's who bought what, when, from whom, and there's really no need to copy all of the surrounding boilerplate over and over and over again. So a lot of that's going to involve doing really collection by collection analysis and triage and coming up with various strategies to grab the various kinds of metadata. And it's going to be a bit of a challenge to manage, I think. There's absolutely no way that an organization of our size can create all of this metadata in-house. Some of it could be done by paid professionals, but 60 million images, think about cost per page times 60 million. It gets pretty cost prohibitive to have it all done professionally. So we're going to need to engage a lot of people, partners, volunteers, a lot of crowdsourcing we're going to have to rely on to do a lot of the work. And because we're going to rely on such a diverse community to get all this metadata created, quality control is also going to be an important issue. And even quality control is something we're probably going to have to crowdsource to a large extent because, again, even just quality checking 60 million pages gets kind of expensive. And so, yeah, this all is going to cost a fair bit of money, and the thing is that we don't have any. So heritage, it's about putting stuff online, but it's also about finding a new way of funding large open access projects. We've discovered over 35 years that grants and centralized funding by a small group of core stakeholders it's unreliable and it's inconsistent. They're both fine for doing sort of short-term projects that have a defined scope and a beginning and an end, but in the long term, you can't rely on a few institutions or a single funding body to consistently supply you with the funds. You not only need to create a project, but to maintain it afterwards. The reason being a bad funding year for any of them may mean that we lose our funding and are left with no means not only to continue, but not to continue doing what we're doing, but no means to continue providing access to what we've already built. So long-term projects and perpetual access need to be self-funded. And so heritage is a bit of an experiment. It's an attempt to develop a self-funded, sustainable, open access digitization project. The ultimate objective is to provide perpetual online open access to all of the images, all of the metadata, all of the tools, and everything else that we create during the course of the project. This is a 10-year project, and if we're successful, then we hope to be able to use this as a model to do other projects, because this content here really just represents a small fraction of what's out there. It's only a tiny fraction of what Library and Archives has, and if you start looking in the libraries and other libraries and archives around the country, there's still an enormous amount of stuff to do. So, I mean, if this works out, then we hope that we can reuse the model to do the next thing, and so on until eventually it all gets done. So the project is broken down into two major phases, or well, they're really going to run concurrently, so two major parts. And the first is the startup part, and this is going to take about 3 years. So during the first 3 years, our goal is to build all of the infrastructure that we need, servers, tools, networks, staff, and everything like that. Digitize all of the images, and if you're counting, that's about 400,000 a week on average. Develop a metadata architecture and standards to describe and store all of this stuff, and create high-level metadata records. So these very simple records for each of the 40,000 reels of film, slightly richer records for each of the 800 or so collections that they belong to. And we're going to run most of the stuff through OCR as well, because we do kind of get some stuff. I mean, it's not much better than nothing, but slightly better than nothing. And then provide basic access to the content based on what little metadata actually exists. And to build all the tools that we need to do all the description and transcription of the rest. So the second part of the project is going to take 10 years to do. And so over a 10-year period, we're going to add metadata at all levels of the collection, ranging from the highest level collections down to individual documents and pages. And the sources for this may include some professional cataloging and description work, user-supplied tags and keywords, paid or volunteer transcription or tagging, and collaborative projects with any interested parties. So, for example, if we can find a researcher who's interested in data mining a section of the collection and they're able to get a grant to get the transcription done for that, then we can collaborate with them. They get their research data, we get the metadata created for the collection. If somebody is interested in testing out some handwriting recognition software or other technological solution to convert handwriting to full text or something else like that, we can volunteer what part of the collection they're interested in as a data set. So to pay for it all, the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, CRKN, they're essentially a site a bulk journal license buying organization that represents research libraries in Canada. They've pledged a $1.8 million in seed money over 2 years. And this is essentially Kickstarter funding. It will cover startup costs, infrastructure, research and development, and it'll fund the production of the first block of content and metadata. But we think the primary funding for Heritage will come from sort of premium subscriptions that we can sell. Now, all of the CRKN funding partners who participate in this Kickstarter will receive perpetual premium access as part of the exchange for providing the initial funding. And we're also going to seek funding from other sources, grant applications, providing related services, advertising, donations. This may be as good a time as any to point out that as a registered charity, we can write you a tax receipt for your donation. So if you have a couple $1 million lying around that you don't know what to do with, do get in touch. All of that will supplement sort of subscription revenue, but we think that probably the bulk of the funding for this project will come from selling value-added premium services. So the way it's going to work is that as content and metadata is paid for, it will move from being premium to being free and then eventually to being open. By free, what we mean is free to access at no charge for anybody, and open meaning free to do whatever you want with, essentially. And this is going to happen over a 10-year period with a minimum of 10% of the material completed to date being made free each year, and by the end of 10 years, it will all be free and open to everybody. If funding levels are high enough, material will be made free and then open at a faster pace, but of course, we can't give what we don't have, so we can't produce it until it's paid for, and we can't give it away until it exists. So what premium access will look like is we're not completely sure at this point. The access model that funds Early Canadiana Online is to charge subscribers for access to the digital content. So you can go to Early Canadiana, you can search and the database, find records, but if you actually want to see the content, you need a subscription. And we don't think that this is the best way to do heritage. We think that if we actually make the image content itself free right from the start to everybody, that we can increase traffic to the site, increase interest in the site, and increase participation in actually creating the metadata. And again, the more volunteer metadata creation we can do, the less money we have to raise to pay to have it done other ways, and so the cheaper the project will get done for everybody. What that means, though, is that a premium subscription, of course, still has to provide something that people are willing to give money for, otherwise they won't. And so it will likely include features such as access to some more sophisticated search tools and the enriched metadata, other research tools and features that we'll create along the way, things like, I don't know, tools to manage documents and reading lists, other things that we're starting to think about, but we won't know until the project's further along what will work and what won't. The ability to download high-resolution originals and other alternate formats. If we have advertising on the site, maybe no advertising for premium subscribers, and most importantly, that warm, fuzzy feeling you get right about here, knowing that you're contributing to something worthwhile. So if we jump ahead, say 10 years from now, suppose this all works out. Everything's been digitized. We've created as much metadata as we've have been able to, given whatever funds we've been able to raise. And so now the entire collection, everything that we've done, is now free, open to everybody. which means no more premium subscriptions, which means no more revenue. So the question then becomes, how do we continue to fund ongoing preservation and access to what we've created? After all, hardware still needs to be replaced, bandwidth still costs money, our programmers and system administrators and support people probably will still want to get paid for the work they do. And so we still need a source of revenue to pay for all that. And our solution to this is to create the Canadiana Sustainability Fund. This is essentially an endowment that we're going to set up. And a portion of all the revenue that we generate from various whatever sources will go into this endowment fund, and over time that'll build up and it will generate interest, and when it gets large enough, it will generate enough interest that it will be able to pay our operating expenses. And what that will mean is that if there ever does come a period where we can't get new funding to do new projects, we'll still be able to sustain ourselves as an organization through that period and still continue to be able to provide access to what we've already created. And if Heritage is successful, we expect to launch additional projects just like it. Again, this is just a really tiny fraction of what's there. I mean, I think LAC has well over half a billion images just of archival content, and I'm sure there's even more hiding. So to date, what we've done is we have a heritage portal up and running. It's at heritage.canadiana.ca. There are 13 different collections with about 240 reels of film. It represents about 400,000 pages of content. We've determined our storage and network requirements, and our infrastructure requirements, and we started building all of that out so that we can actually house the collection and digitize it and move it around from place to place. We've purchased our scanners and have started digitizing. We've started hiring the additional staff that we need. We've signed a contract with a metadata specialist who's going to do a project to consult with the community to determine what standards are in use and what standards and practices we should adopt, particularly things like ontologies for linked open data. And we started working on partnerships. For example, we've approached CLA about getting public libraries involved, the idea being something like we might be able to offer premium access through public libraries in exchange for the public libraries promoting the service and encouraging their users to participate in metadata creation. So over the next year, we're going to have to ramp up to full production speed. Again, we've only done less than 500,000 pages online right now, plus a number of others in process, but that's kind of what we're going to end up having to churn out on a weekly basis. So we have a little ways to go. Build and launch the first transcription and crowdsourcing tools, which are currently in development, and define and launch a premium subscription service. So there's a lot that we don't know about how this is going to go, and this is a long project, and we've really just gotten started. And it's going to take a while even to fully scope things out. The main priority now is to really get as much content as possible to serve as a basis for what has to come next. And so it's an experiment. We don't know how it's going to turn out. It's hard to imagine. Like, we're pretty confident that it's not going to fail completely. The very worst case is we're going to end up with a lot of content that is currently only accessible in person in a reading room that will be online, accessible to everyone, and at least somewhat more discoverable through existing metadata. So that's kind of the worst case scenario, and the best case scenario is we create an extremely large, rich set of metadata that can be used both for discovery and for data mining, and we can move on to do the rest of what's out there. And I haven't really written an ending or anything, so yeah.